And welcome to the Sports Dude Hine Show. Today is November 30th, 2021. Today's episode, we have a lot to talk about, so much college football news. Joining me in just a few minutes will be TJ Shoemaker. But before we start talking about all the college football madness with coaches hiring, top teams losing the recently released college football playoff rankings, I want to talk a little bit about the NFL. This past week there was a couple, of good games, and there's no better game than the Cincinnati Bengals humiliating the Pittsburgh Steelers 41-10. It was an amazing game to be a Bengals fan. It was so funny, seeing this Bengals game, and it was over by halftime. And when these two teams met back in September, Cincinnati ended up winning this game 24-10. And you hear all these Pittsburgh fans, oh, TJ Watt's out. When TJ Watt comes back, oh, we're going to humiliate Cincinnati and all that. He's going to get in Burrow's face and all that crap. And, the excuses pile up for Pittsburgh. And, fortunately for us, I like to play teams who are, I want, when the Bengals play a team, I want them to be healthy. So when the Bengals do beat them, there's no excuses like Watt, missing in September. So, this game was really, it seemed like it was over just from the first 5 minutes. You could tell that Cincinnati, they were going to win the game. There was no fire from this Pittsburgh team, which was just awesome, really. Burrow only had 4 completions, had just under 200 passing yards. He had a touchdown, 1 interception, and a rushing touchdown. Mixon was absolutely phenomenal, had a career high 165 rushing yards, 2 rushing TDs. T. Higgins over 100 over 100 receiving yards and a touchdown. This defense was freaking phenomenal. You had Eli Apple with an interception. Mike Hilton had a pick 6 just before the end of the first half. Trey Hendrickson had a sack with a forced fumble on that play. And also Sam Hubbard had a sack as well. And it's so funny, something else with TJ Watt. Anytime he plays the game, watch out for TJ Watt. He's going to be the top defensive player in this game. He's going to be top impact player. But, if you look at, heading into this game, TJ Watt was in the top 10, had the top 10 pressures against quarterbacks heading into this game. But who else was in the top 10? Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson, the only teammates who were both in the top 10. But, guess what? Typical Cincinnati fashion, they're never talked about. And, Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard had more sacks than TJ Watt had tackles total. And, the only play literally TJ Watt really had any effect was when Burrow threw an interception just before the end of the first half. And TJ Watt was holding Burrow purposely, trying not to, get him involved in that play. Possibly, you never know, the Steelers maybe trying to hurt him. And, that was the only thing really TJ Watt was really mentioned that he did something. You look at Isaiah Prince, he came in for Riley Reif the second half. He was phenomenal. He had one of the top PFF grades for us. He made TJ Watt look like some just random guy. The fact that we made TJ Watt, who's supposedly this best player in the NFL, which he definitely is one of the best players in the league, we made him look like just some bum, just average guy out there. Our defense was phenomenal. Our offense was phenomenal. It was just so awesome to see this Bengals team that we've wanted to see for so long. We swept the Steelers. It is so crazy. It's the first time I believe we swept them in about 10 years. It's the first time we've had a 3-game win streak against the Steelers in over 30 years. That is just pretty much laughable to say, honestly, because, we have not been able to beat the Steelers. Even when we've been really good, we haven't been able to beat them. They're just the one team we haven't beat, and now we sweep them. We have a big game this week against the Chargers. This should be really good. And I cannot wait to see us play this week. Burrow against Herbert. It's going to be so much fun. This Bengals team, I know just a couple of weeks ago, some of us were saying maybe we're not as good as what we thought, including myself. After that Jets loss and that Browns loss, we really had to regroup during the bye week. And that's exactly what we did. Beat 2 teams who were over 500 by more than 20 points. We are playing great right now. Definitely one of the best teams in the AFC. I would say a top 10 team in the NFL right now for sure. And, switching gears, but staying in the AFC North. Sunday Night Football, it was the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Cleveland Browns. If the Browns would have won this game, the Bengals would have been first place in the AFC North. And, the Ravens ended up winning this game against the Browns 16-10. And Lamar Jackson looked absolutely horrible. He had 4 interceptions against the Browns defense who, when you look at the paper and look at the roster, that looks like a Browns defense, but they're not as good as people, think they are. Jackson had 4 picks, 3 of them being in 1 quarter. It is another time where Baltimore bails out Lamar Jackson. He is so overrated. And I hear people say he's more underrated than overrated. He's the most hated player in the NFL. And to me, I feel like that's kind of just stupid in the fact, like, he is a good athlete. He is phenomenal. He's a good quarterback, but he's not a great quarterback. He cannot lead your team to a Super Bowl win, in my opinion. Look at last year against Tennessee. The only reason they won that game was because their defense bailed them out because Jackson played like crap, and Baltimore ended up winning. To me, when you look at the stats, look Baltimore and Jackson in general. Well, one, I feel like Jackson, to me, you look at the times for instances where Baltimore has bailed him out. This is mind-boggling to me. This stats. When Josh Allen has thrown for multiple interceptions in the game this year, the Bills are 1-2. When Tom Brady has thrown multiple interceptions in the game this year, the Buccaneers are 1-2. When Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert have thrown for multiple picks in a game this season, both the Bengals and the Chargers are 0-3. But when Lamar Jackson has thrown for multiple interceptions in one game, the Baltimore Ravens are not 1-0. They're not 2-0. They're not 3-0. They are 4-0 when Lamar Jackson throws for multiple interceptions. If that does not say that Baltimore's defense clearly bails him out, even more than I originally expected, I don't know what else more to tell you that this Baltimore team, this defense is bailing Jackson out. And honestly, this Baltimore team as a whole is extremely overrated. They have 8 wins right now, but 6 of their 8 wins are by 1 possession. 7 of those starts are by Jackson, and 5 out of 7 Jackson's wins at the start of the season are by 1 possession. You look at those 6 out of their 8 wins by 1 possession, only one of those teams are above 500. And look what happened when the Ravens played the Bengals, a month or so ago. The Bengals humiliated them. I truly hope when it comes to playoff time, obviously, I really, really hope the Bengals end up winning the AFC North. I think right now we are definitely capable of it. I feel 100%, in my opinion, I think we're the best team in the AFC North right now, without a doubt. I'm not trying to be biased. I just truly think we are. I hope so bad the Bengals end up playing the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs this season, because I think we would 100% beat them. I have 100% confidence that we would end up beating the Baltimore Ravens if we played each other in the playoffs. Because I've said this multiple times, not just this video, but multiple times before. Baltimore bails out Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has never had a good playoff game. Even his win last year, he struggled a lot. He struggles a lot this year, even in their wins. It is crazy to me. The people think that Lamar Jackson is this MVP candidate. Honestly, I don't even think he's the best quarterback in his own division right now. I know some people say, Burrow's picks are a concern, which at times they are, but look at Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has the same amount of interceptions as Joe Burrow. I feel like, Burrow's been playing better as of late, really the past couple of weeks against the Steelers and the Raiders. But with Jackson, he is so inconsistent as a passer. As a runner, he is nearly impossible to stop. But even in some of his wide open passes, he can barely complete them. I feel like this Baltimore team and Lamar Jackson are both extremely overrated, and I really, really, really hope this Bengals team ends up playing Baltimore in the playoffs, because I really feel that we can beat them in the postseason. They got our first postseason victory in over 30 years. That's just pretty, embarrassing to say, honestly. But that kind of outdoes it for the NFL. And joining me now is let me see here. Joining me now is TJ Shoemaker. He was on last week's episode. We talked a lot about college football and a lot about the Florida Gators. He's a big Florida fan. Also has his own podcast called the Section 111 Podcast. So how you doing today, TJ?
Jordan, I'm good. I appreciate you bringing me on once again. I enjoyed coming on last week, and I'm glad that we were able to set this up and do it again.
Yeah, really glad you could be in the show. We talked about last week possibly doing a video, kind of towards bowl season. Ended up doing a video tonight, not really, planning on it, but just the amount of madness in college football the past couple of days is insane. It would be dumb not to do a video, honestly. Just the amount of the content in this all around, this college football world. And before we start talking about Florida with Billy Napier and Lincoln Riley and all these coaches leaving, you ended up going to the Marshall game this past week. I'm a big Marshall fan myself. I don't really talk about it much on the show, but Marshall played West Kentucky this past week. It was an embarrassing game. They lost by over 30 points. And, the past couple of weeks to me, I've really noticed it seems like Marshall home games, they're not what they used to be. I've been to 2 games this year. I went to Appalachian State game and the UAB game. And, they ended up losing both of those games. And you look back at 2013 to 2015, Marshall only had 1 home loss, and that was to West Kentucky, obviously in 2014. That was their only loss that season. They lost on literally the final play of the game. And you look at, the past several years, since 2016 to 2021 this year, Marshall is 20-14 against FBS opponents at home. That is just absolutely crazy. And every year except for 2019, they've had multiple home losses in each of those seasons. And something else that's really kind of crazy as well, they have 14 losses in that span. 6 of those losses, which, just one more is half, 6 of those losses are by 20 points or more. And it's crazy to me looking at this, Marshall team, 2013, 2015. We were really, really good. It did not matter who you played in Jones C. Edwards Stadium. If you were not a top threat like Ohio State or Alabama or something like that, I felt really confident we could really go out there in our home field and beat just about anybody. Now it's to the point it just seems like a game that's a toss-up regardless who they play. It's crazy that just the lack of, back then it was, we more than likely were going to win. Now it's you're just uncertain about Marshall be able to get a victory in their home field. And to me, I feel like, and Marshall wants respect, not only in Conference USA and, going to be the Sun Belt students starting in 2023, and they want respect across the nation. They need to start winning their home games first like they used to. Back then, that's when they got respect. Now they're not really getting as much media attention as they once did. You need to start winning your home games first, start going undefeated, on your home field like you used to, before you can get more respect across the country and everything like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the biggest thing that needs to happen, you mentioned it, is winning at home. I think that Coach Huff and this Marshall program, really needs to put an emphasis on protecting the Joan and, protect the M, as they used to say, and, really put an emphasis on winning at home. And I think that alone will draw a crowd. I go to every game. I'm a Marshall season ticket holder, and if you look back a few weeks ago for the anniversary of the plane crash, by halftime, half of the students, or more than half the student section, had already left. That, like you said, the crowds really aren't what they used to be, and this is a very fair weather fan base. And, I just think that whenever things are great, that place is popping, and they're packing the stands, and, they're loud, and they come ready to cheer. And then, when things aren't going so great, I'm thinking in my head last year, didn't started off great, didn't end the season very well. And all of a sudden, it feels like Marshall's struggling to put butts in the seats. And, I think, back to your point, that all starts with winning at home, protecting your home field. And by doing that, you normally play more home games than away games. Usually it's, 7 home, 5 away typically. So, if you just take care of business at home, you're already bowl bound or better. And then, that next step is putting an emphasis on winning on the road, and, going into opposing stadiums and imposing your will and walking out of those stadiums with a W and leaving the other crowd disappointed. And by having that mindset and in those particular steps, you set yourself up for successful seasons. And by successful, I mean, I think 9 or 10 wins at Marshall is very possible. And I think that's, that's typically the expectation at Marshall. It's hard to go 12-0, and I don't think anybody really expects Coach Huff to go 12-0 year in, year out. But, I think 10 wins is attainable, and I think that needs to really be kind of a target moving forward. And like you said, I think that by doing this and really winning at home, I think that they could really strive for that and, fix the issue, which is getting people to show up. Because I'll admit the "We Are Marshall" chant, where one side says "We Are" and the other side says "Marshall," it doesn't give you the chills like it used to. With the exception of the real big games. I'm thinking Louisville a couple years ago when they were number 3 and came to the Joan. That was different. But on just a regular, say, Conference USA matchup, it really doesn't hit the same like it used to. So I do think that Coach Huff is making an effort to, not only put W's in the win column, but I think that he's also making an emphasis on making the game day environment and atmosphere better. I mean, he's already done a great job of doing that outside of the stadium. Now it's time to really focus on doing it, inside the stadium and on the football field.
Yeah, you mentioned, 9 or 10 wins at Marshall. I feel like that, really should be their goal. Heading into the season, there was so much hype around Huff, his expectations at Marshall, him coming from the Nick Saban tree. And, to me, I thought we were going to go 10-2 in the regular season. I thought we were going to lose to Navy and Appalachian State. Obviously, Navy was not nearly as good as anybody thought. No. Appalachian State was still, pretty good like they normally are. And, obviously we lose to, Appalachian State. And then we have, we just have so many, games we should have not lost this season. And you mentioned, attendance. And it's like, really, even look at like 13, 14, and 15, even those games, our attendance was horrible. The only game throughout that, 3-year span that really, felt like there was a good atmosphere was the Purdue game. We ended up winning that game by 10 points.
Yeah.
And, the final game of the regular season, 2014, their only loss in that 3-year span, there was still nobody at that game. Like, I honestly don't even know if it was halfway, full. And I think it was either 2012, 2011, 2012. I remember Virginia Tech played at Marshall, and they were like 10th in the country or something like that. The stadium maybe would have been like 1/3 of the way packed. Like, it's crazy. You mentioned, fair weather fans with this fan base. It's a perfect description of what this fan base is. And if Marshall's not in the 10 win column or winning the conference championship, you're not going to have those extra fans, or unless you're having a occasional Purdue, Louisville, NC State, Cincinnati, those type of big opponents come in, nobody's really going to care, because after that game, the following week when we play a UAB or a Southern Miss, nobody's going to be at those games. And I've said this, I've talked to people multiple times. I feel like you look at Marshall's fan base, regardless of how good they are, how sucky they are. There's always going to be that 10 to 12,000 fans who are going to be there week in and week out. And it's the older people who are Marshall fans, the people who have really been through it all, through the, not being good throughout the Snyder days, and people who might have been alive, when the plane crash happened, the people who are with them now. You're always going to have that type of, certain devout fan base who's always going to be through it all. But aside from them, it's to the point like anymore, if Marshall isn't exceeding expectations, or if they're not having this top, team in Jones C. Edwards Stadium, that the attendance isn't really going to matter. And I feel like the only way you really can get attendance up is by winning games, obviously. But even when you've won games, it's like the attendance really didn't go up. It's just crazy to me, because maybe the, going to the Sun Belt, starting 2023, maybe that makes a little bit of a difference. But it's interesting, with Marshall and the fan base and the really lack of, attendance throughout the years.
Yeah, you make a great point about the Sun Belt. I think that will help, because I think the Sun Belt has a couple more quality teams that may be coming to Huntington, every other year. So I think that will help. The biggest thing is, when I think about what puts people in the seats, I mean, think of why you go to a whether it be a sporting event or whatever type of event you go to, a concert, whatever, you're there for entertainment. So, from a football standpoint, you want to put, an exciting offense on the field, that scores a lot of points and is fun to watch. And then on the flip side of that, you want to put a tenacious defense on the field. So, I know that sounds, pretty obvious, but, putting the best offense, the best defense on the field, I know it's not the easiest job in the world. And that's obviously what every football program strives to do. And, sometimes they just don't do that. But you have to be able to sell your product. You're not going to be able to have a Kmart mentality and be able to sell Target and Walmart products. I mean, if you want to be the real deal, you have to put out the real deal. And so, I think going back to the Rakeem Cato days in that offense, its defense at times had deficiencies, but overall the offense was exciting to watch. I mean, you had guys like Tommy Shuler setting records, Rakeem Cato setting records, Devin Johnson setting records. I mean, that was just it was fun to watch. I mean, that was a hot ticket. So, and I mean, you could go back farther throughout Marshall's history and think of players and teams that were exciting to watch. But I think that's the main thing. And Marshall basketball did a great job of that whenever they hired Mike D'Antoni. Similar approach. I think their approach was let's hire someone that's fun and makes it fun to watch. And I think that really boosted Marshall's basketball program from a viewership standpoint. So I think that the same approach kind of needs to be done with the football program. I know that Marshall has their guy in Coach Huff, and I hope that he can stay around for a couple more years. I know his name had floated out there with the Virginia Tech job, but thankfully he's still with the Herd, and I hope that Marshall can really build something special under him and his staff, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you mentioned, a hot ticket and, being great in offense and defense. 2014, we had the best offense and defense. 2015, we had the best defense. Yeah. And, with Cato and, Shuler, and, there was even guys on defense who, never really made it to the NFL, but was just, so good. Evan McKelvey, TJ Hunter, Neville Hewitt, he was made a big, interception in the conference championship game.
Yeah.
He's been in the NFL for a while now. And I mean, Devin Johnson, to this day, to me, I feel like he's one of the best running backs I've ever seen. And it's like back then, like you don't know if you're going to see Rakeem Cato pass for like 4 or 5 touchdowns or Devin Johnson rush for 200 yards.
Yeah.
And it's like that uncertainty of like when's going to happen. You cannot wait. It's just like which one's going to happen. One will. And it's like now it's like since those guys have left, Marshall football, they've not had, those guys. They've had people like Tyree Brady, who honestly never, to me, I mean, he was good, but I don't think he really, panned out to the expectations when he originally, ended up coming to Marshall. What's his Alex Thompson? He comes in from Wagner. There was talks he could have went to Tennessee, and we see Thompson and Brady. Some people are saying, oh, it's going to be the best quarterback and wide receiver connection we've seen since Cato and Shuler. Thompson he didn't even start that season. He only started 4 games with Marshall.
Yeah,
and it's crazy because they've lacked that really star power of the individual player who can really boost tickets. You mentioned Marshall basketball. Now that's just a completely different story because it really seems like really ever since D'Antoni, for the most part, has been at Marshall, they've always had that one guy. James Kelly. He was really really good coming from Miami. Obviously. The best Marshall player of all time. I mean, you have Elmore, Burks. Right. Now we have Kinsey. And if you get one of those top guys, your ticket sales will increase. But it's one of those things. It's just so hard to find, a top talent like that and getting to him like a small school like Marshall. Marshall got super super lucky with Kinsey coming here. He's from like near Columbus. I don't get Ohio State. I'm surprised Ohio State did not end up getting him. But it's just like it's crazy because it's like we've really lacked that star power, just specifically on football. And until that, it's kind of hard wanting to go to a game. Like, do you want to go, I don't know, hang out with friends on Saturday, or do you want to go see Marshall play a game you don't even know if they're going to win or not? And it's not like they have those top players that it's going to be such an entertaining purpose to end up going to their game.
Yeah, and one thing that I think can change all of that, what you were saying about bringing in, that one guy that can really, put butts in the seats and be a reason that people show up. I think that a guy like Coach Huff can utilize the transfer portal and possibly get, someone from a bigger school that may not, be the starter at that school, but could come to a place like Marshall and play in Conference USA or, leading into the Sun Belt and kind of be like the face of the program from an NIL standpoint. So like you could sell a guy on, hey, look, you come to Marshall, you might be viewed as a god if you're what you say you are. So, I don't have any insight to this. I mean, I'm a Marshall season ticket holder. I don't have, any true connections or anything like that. But to me, Coach Huff strikes me as the type of guy that he's going to do what it takes to win. And I don't think that, because he didn't sit in, say, Grant Wells' living room and make him any promises or anything like that, I don't think he has any, I don't think he has any strings attached to where he has to do this or that. I think that he could go into the portal if he wanted to and grab a pretty good quarterback that can be the face of Marshall and not only, translate to wins and stuff like that, like we talked about, but, just bring in somebody that people want to come see and enjoy watching. You mentioned John Elmore. That's my guy, man. I talk to John every now and then, on social media and stuff like that. And he was actually a guest on my podcast one time. So if you guys want to, you can go to my podcast and check that out. But, someone like that is just so polarizing within a program, even the magnitude of Marshall, like, we can find someone that, whether it be through recruiting or through the portal, that can be looked at like a John Elmore from the football standpoint. We kind of saw that with Cato a little bit, and some of those guys on that team. There were several. I think that Marshall can get back to that. And like I said, I think that Coach Huff is the type that he's willing to do what it takes to improve, the talent on this team. And I think he's going to be a guy that utilizes the transfer portal. And I'm not just saying he's going to go grab him a quarterback or anything like that, but I think he's going to use it as a way to really help the depth on this roster. I think he already grabbed a transfer, a defensive end transfer from Miami a couple weeks ago. I believe I saw that. So, he's going to work this portal and continue to recruit at a high level and bring in talented guys. And we may just end up with a guy, that we don't even know about at this moment. So we'll see.
And it's interesting you bring that up because you look at Elmore. Obviously he came from VMI, and then you see these other guys, who really, were good, but not nearly as good as Elmore. Like, for example, Dennis Tennant. He was one of my favorite players back then.
Yeah.
He came from Milwaukee. Kane, I think he originally committed to Pittsburgh. Ryan Taylor, he was I think he was originally going to commit to Louisville. So you look at Marshall basketball in particular, and somebody else, Stevie Browning, which to me, I feel like he's going to, in my opinion, I feel like Stevie Browning is one of the most underrated Marshall basketball players. Him and CJ Burks, one of the most underrated players Marshall's ever had at basketball. But, some of those guys who are really, really good, and they come from different schools. We haven't really seen that from Marshall football, though. But you make a great point about that, especially at quarterback, because, you look, when Marshall's been relevant, Marshall's only been relevant when they've had a good quarterback. Pennington, Leftwich, Cato, and 13 and 14. And really, I guess you can throw Chase Litton in there for 2015, but just 16 and went on after that. Really, ever since that hit against Akron, 2016, he was never the same. But 15, he was really good as a freshman. And so we've always had a good quarterback when we've been really on the national, spotlight and have, top media attention. That's interesting because, Wells, there's times he looks really good, and there's times it's like, what the heck is he doing? Like, he's super inconsistent. You
Yeah.
see the potential that he has, but let's say Huff would go in there, maybe get a, transfer or something like that. And it's like, it's interesting because with Wells's, his potential is there, but he doesn't always show it type of deal. If Huff goes in and all of a sudden we have a quarterback controversy, I feel like I can maybe get the best out of both of those guys. And then we see, Marshall be better because 9 times out of 10, when you have a better quarterback on the field than the other guy, you're going to end up winning that game. So that's a really interesting point about possibly, a quarterback with Huff, possibly with the transfer portal.
Yeah, and I don't, like I said, I don't have any true insight to this or anything like that. But just as an example, like if you're Huff and you go out and grab a guy, say like Emory Jones, if he were to enter the portal, Marshall grabs a guy like that, people are going to read that headline and say, wow, Marshall got a quarterback from Florida, like from the University of Florida. So like that instantly, like they're going to want to just migrate to Jones C. Edwards Stadium and see what this kid's about. So, I'm not like it said, there's nothing that points to Emory Jones going to Marshall. I was just using that as an example, but you get the point. Like someone of that magnitude that their name and that they have some skill, and for whatever reason it didn't work out at their other school, there's still some excitement that comes with getting a guy of that caliber. Those former high 4-star recruit.
And we've kind of seen that before, just in Conference USA. 2014, 2015. I don't remember the year. It was around that time frame. With Louisiana Tech, they bring in Driscoll, who used to play for Florida. Didn't really work out with Florida because Louisiana Tech had a much better career with them than it did with the Gators. And then I think it's Louisiana Tech right now. I was watching a game a couple weeks ago, and they have Austin Kendall, who used to be who was going to go to Oklahoma. Then he transferred to West Virginia. That's basically supposed to be what Spencer Rattler was supposed to be. The star of Oklahoma. Then he goes to Louisiana Tech. And if you got a guy like that, that really could help, ticket sales a lot. Obviously, it'd be so cool to see Emory Jones and Huntington. That's not going to happen. But, you would not be able to stop the run. But, if we're down, we are basically screwed. Like, we are not able to pass at all. But, it's who knows with Marshall. I really, really hope they end up playing Florida in the Gasparilla Bowl. It's probably not going to happen. I want to see that so bad. But.
Yeah, the latest bowl projection I saw had Florida playing UCF. So, that, and I don't really, as a Florida fan, I don't really like that matchup just because, in that type of game, UCF, to them, they have everything to gain, and Florida really doesn't have anything to gain, especially without a head coach, a O-line coach, and multiple other staffers that they just don't have right now. So I think that's something that if they play it, hell, UCF might win, and to them they might put up another banner or something. You never know.
And with Florida, it's everything I've seen, it's almost a near lock that they're going to play in the Gasparilla Bowl. And whoever they play, I keep seeing it could be UCF. To me, I think that makes so much sense for that, though, because both these teams did not live up to expectations. In the Gasparilla Bowl, 9 times out of 10, that's not game is not even going to sell a third of the tickets because you don't have an opportunity to have 2 in-state teams like Florida and UCF, who in years past, just these past few years, have been really, really good. I feel like on a ticket sale standpoint, that's really the best possible thing you can do. But Florida, though, with the Gasparilla Bowl, I'm seeing they want them so bad because regardless of who Florida's playing, whether it's a Georgia State or Marshall or whoever it may be, you're going to at least get those ticket sales for Florida's fan base, which obviously, being in Tampa and Gainesville just a couple of hours away. So you're going to get that, which is genius. I would love to see Marshall in that game. It's not going to happen, but with Florida, obviously the big news announced a couple of days ago. Their new head coach is Billy Napier. We both talked here last week how we both really, really wanted Billy Napier to be the Florida Gators' next head coach. I'm really, really excited about this hire. So what are your thoughts on Napier to Gainesville?
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, we talked about it last week. I said that was the hot name, trending Florida's way, and everything that I had read and heard and all that stuff. That was Florida's guy from the get go. So Florida. I'm happy about the fact that Florida really targeted who they wanted and got that guy right away. They hired him within less than a week of firing Dan Mullen, which is pretty crazy when you think about I don't want to get off on a tangent, but USC getting Lincoln Riley, but they had fired Clay Helton months ago. So their coaching search essentially was going on for months. But I mean, Florida getting their guy in 1 week, and supposedly, this is just rumor. Obviously, we'll never know 100% or not, but supposedly Florida or Brian Kelly's camp, if you want to call it that, had reached out to Florida about possible interest, and supposedly Florida told Brian Kelly thanks but no thanks. That they were pretty much all in from Billy Napier from the beginning. So I think that's pretty encouraging if you're a Florida fan. That Florida is really that confident in Billy Napier moving forward, and I think that they are confident in his recruiting abilities and his ties not only within the state of Louisiana where he just came from, but also his previous ties in the state of Florida. I think we mentioned it last week. He had brought in guys like Calvin Ridley and Jerry Jeudy and some of those South Florida guys, so he has ties within the state. And since the hiring, there have been several big-time programs, high school programs within the state of Florida. Their coaches have come out and said how much they love this hire, how much they love Billy Napier. And, that has to make you feel good knowing that, Billy Napier is going to be going into these high schools and walking these halls and talking to these prospects and their coaches and already having that connection established and those relationships and stuff. So, I as for my reaction, I wasn't surprised and I was very excited. I think that for the first time since Urban Meyer that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I had my positive vibes and thoughts about Muschamp, McElwain and Mullen. I was actually really excited about Mullen, but this one to me just kind of feels different. To me, it feels kind of just like the home run. And I know that people outside of the Florida, fan base probably don't understand why Florida fans see it that way. They're like, you've got a group of 5 head coach. Like, what are you excited about? He has 0 Power 5 experience and has never, really been at a big time program before from a head coaching standpoint. But, when you really do your homework and look at, follow the breadcrumbs and, follow his career up to this point, there's a lot to like about Billy Napier. And especially when you hear all these other coaches and media members and stuff just say nothing but positive things about Billy Napier, that's when you've got the right guy. Because if you think back, whenever Dan Mullen was hired, there was a lot of, Florida fans were excited, but there was a lot of negative views on Dan Mullen coming into that hire. So there were some doubts from the beginning, definitely from a recruiting standpoint, but also from the standpoint of he's ran a small program like Mississippi State, and yeah, he had been at Florida during the glory years, but how much of that did he soak in, and how good of a culture was it actually at Florida? Even during the glory years with Urban Meyer, they were winning games and winning championships. But if you look at what the culture was, it wasn't a great culture. And so, I don't think Dan Mullen really learned a lot from that aspect under Urban Meyer. And I think that kind of translated to his most recent tenure at Florida. So I think that, Billy Napier checks a lot of boxes from, the recruiting, the culture, and just being a CEO and very hands-on, but still allowing his guys, who I'll get to that in a minute, as far as like coordinators and other staffers, how that goes. And I mean, when he was hired, there were talks about him really impressing Scott Strickland, the athletic director, with his request from the get-go of what he wanted from Florida in order to take this job. And I'm excited about the fact that Florida said yes to everything that he wanted, because I think that he knows exactly what he wants. It's just a matter of getting access to those resources and to be able to utilize them. And I think that Florida is finally allowing their head coach to do that. And if they do that, I think that Florida can build something special, very similar to what Kirby Smart has built at Georgia, and obviously what Nick Saban has done in Alabama. I'm not saying that within the next 3 or 5 years that's what Florida is going to be, but I think that he can get them kind of on the right track and in that direction. So I'm excited, but I think that there's a lot of groundwork that really has to be laid before this thing can really take off.
And you look at kind of some of the hires before this. McElwain, to me, that was kind of a head scratcher in my opinion. Dan Mullen, when they first hired him, to me, I was kind of skeptical about it. And as time went on, maybe he could do some things at Florida. But it's one of those things with Mullen. He was good, but he never lived up to his potential. And with Napier, I feel like you said this is a home run hire. I feel like this is just like a bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, grand slam type of hire for with Napier coming to Gainesville. I just feel like this is the best possible guy that can get out there. I know some people maybe wanted Lane Kiffin or whoever, it may be, but you mentioned, kind of like the CEO approach with Napier, kind of like a Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, coming from the Nick Saban tree, coming, from Dabo Swinney and Clemson as well. He's been with the top premier coaches in college football right now. So he's one of the best group of five coaches. He was one of the best group of five recruiters. That was something else kind of, towards the end of Mullen, lots of people were just getting frustrated with recruiting. That was kind of a downfall when he was with Gainesville. Had 3 straight seasons having the best recruiting class in his conference, which was the Sun Belt. And there's really not much to dislike from Napier. I said last week, the only, the only thing I did not like was him not really having that Power 5 experience as a head coach. But when he's been everywhere else, like at Alabama and at Clemson, it's kind of, he's basically been there. He's not been, their head coach. I feel like Napier, though, it's so much different from those two hires like Mullen and McElwain. It just extra potential and, the energy that he's going to bring in Gainesville is just much different than, those other hirings. To me, this is the best possible choice Florida could have got. And you mentioned with Kelly, if that was true, I'm really glad they shot that down, because if they would have got Brian Kelly from Notre Dame, I would have been so ticked off. But this is, it's such a great hire. You see some of these people who might be, a casual watcher of college football. Oh, you got some guy from Louisiana. Why would you not get some guy from, for example, Lincoln Riley or something like that? The potential that Napier has, I feel like his potential is better than the Brian Kelly. I think it's better than a Kiffin, because I just don't think that would have worked out. I feel like Napier, give him a couple years, I think Florida could be, I'm not going to say, national championship contenders, but I think they're going to be right where they were, honestly, last season. One of the best teams in the country. I'm really, really excited for this. This was the best possible decision the Gators could have made by hiring Billy Napier.
Yeah, one more thing, and then I'll let us move on. But the biggest thing, it's like, Florida possibly could have gone after Lincoln Riley. I don't know whether he had interest in Florida or not, but just as an example, or accepted Brian Kelly for that matter, someone like that, they're going to demand, top dollar to begin with. Billy Napier's in a position where he can't really demand that, but whatever Florida is willing to meet him at is good for both parties. So I think from a money standpoint, they can pay him and, allot the money that he's really wanting for his staff, because I think that's more important to him than anything. And I think that says a lot about his character and everything. So Florida's going to be able to pour a lot more money into not only the coordinators and the position coaches, but one thing that makes Billy Napier so different from a lot of coaches, but especially a lot of young coaches like himself, as he's only 41 years old, is his support staff. So what Billy Napier wants to do is build the best, one of the biggest and best support staffs in, all of college football, but, more specifically in the SEC, because he understands that if you don't do that, especially in the SEC, it's recruit or die, basically. And that was something that Mullen really didn't understand, surprisingly. So to be able to compete with the Georgias and the Alabamas, this is part of his, what he calls the process. And, this is what makes Billy Napier so special to, and, that's really in other people's words, but they say that that's why he's so perfect for this job. Is like I said, he checks off a lot of boxes, but his level of understanding is just off the charts. And he wants to build that support staff, much like Alabama and Georgia have. And surprisingly, I didn't know this, but Georgia actually has the biggest recruiting support staff with all those analysts and that kind of thing in the entire SEC, followed by Alabama. So it's kind of clear to see why Georgia has kind of this year at least overtaken Nick Saban in the SEC. Well, I guess we'll find out on Saturday, but as from a recruiting standpoint, has kind of overtaken Nick Saban in recruiting because of the staff that Kirby Smart has put together. And so Billy Napier understands that this is what he has to do, and he trusts in his process and everything like that. And I think that getting a guy like Brian Kelly or Lincoln Riley just kind of handcuffed you in ways that most people don't really understand, whether it be from a money aspect, and just I don't know if a guy like Brian Kelly would be able to get what he wants and still put together the appropriate pieces that need to be put in place at Florida. And it's not just on the one head coach. It's kind of stuff that has built up since, say, the Urban Meyer days, because they have let things go as far as facilities and stuff like that. So, Florida's in the process of playing catch up, to these other schools from a facility standpoint, and, from just overall, a culture and everything within their program. So I think that a guy like Billy Napier is willing to kind of go through that rebuilding process. And I think that he was willing to do it the way that, well, I don't want to say the way that Florida wanted, because I think it's his vision, but I think that Florida was comfortable with what, each party wanted. And I think that I trust the process, that they have enough faith in Billy Napier to get the job done. So, it's early, he was just hired this past week, but we'll see in 3 to 4 years really what this thing looks like. And, hopefully everything that I'm saying right now really translates over that time, and Florida becomes a powerhouse once again.
And, you mentioned rebuilding, which is really interesting, because you look at Lincoln Riley, he never really had the rebuild when he was with Oklahoma, because Stoops already made them to one of the best teams in the Big 12.
Right.
Look at Brian Kelly. When he came to be the next, head coach in Notre Dame wasn't bad. They might not be exceeding expectations for what their program and everything like that, but they weren't bad. It's not like they're, coming into this, dumpster fire, university. When, Billy Napier comes into Louisiana has been really, really good the past several seasons. They weren't really good when he took over, and he builds them into having 3 straight 10-win seasons. So he's not unfamiliar with having a rebuild process. He's already done it, with Louisiana. So what's stopping him from doing it again at Florida, which I think he's perfectly capable of doing. And something else with Napier, you mentioned he's not going to be making the money like Lincoln Riley or Brian Kelly, which honestly is a really, really good thing. Because let's say if Florida would have considered a Brian Kelly, a Lincoln Riley, a Lane Kiffin, that is, to me, I feel like that's really, really risky because the money is going to be far more than what Napier will be getting with Gainesville and with, the star power name. Lincoln Riley's been one of the better head coaches in college football ever since he's been the head coach of Oklahoma. Lane Kiffin, I said it last week, I think he's overrated, but he's done good at Ole Miss. He was good at FAU. Brian Kelly I think he's also a little bit overrated as well, but he's done good with Notre Dame. But when you have these top premier coaches, they're going to be getting paid a super amount, like we've already seen with Kelly and Riley's contracts. When you look at Billy Napier, who's not going to be getting nearly as much, the expectations with Napier is much more interesting. And I feel like with Napier, it's a much, I know it sounds kind of crazy. I think it's the safest out of those four names I mentioned because it is extremely low risk and the reward is literally possibly being national champions. Because with Lincoln Riley, Kelly, Kiffin, that is a high risk because you're paying top dollar. If you don't win at least one championship, let's say in a 4 or 5 year period, there's a chance. I mean, there could be a buyout happening with those guys. But with Napier, who's not getting near as much money, there's not that reward, not that risk like a Riley, who really, if he had like a 10-year contract with USC, if he didn't get if he had a 10-year contract with Florida, if he didn't win like 2 national championships, I mean, obviously you'd be happy with one, but the top dollar that he's getting, it kind of be disappointing, honestly. But with Napier, the way less money he's getting to be the Gators head coach, and him not being that star power guy like Kiffin and those other guys, I really feel like can kind of benefit Florida because, like I said, I feel like it's extremely low risk, but the reward is really, the sky's the limit for the reward, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, Billy Napier is not the big name, but to me, the right hire isn't always about getting the biggest name. It's about getting the best fit. And I think that, like I said before, I won't repeat myself, but with the boxes, he checks them. So he just brings a lot to the table that Florida desired, and I think that Florida brings a lot, to his table that he desires. I think he was ready for that next step at a big time program, but I think that it wasn't just going to be any program, because if you think back to the last coaching carousel, he had offers to go to Auburn, he had offers to go to South Carolina, so it had to be the right fit for him, and so for him to turn those offers down and then jump ship a year later for Florida tells me that it's right for him, and for Florida to target him first and only. I think this is the first time in college football history that an athletic director could say, we got our guy on the first attempt and actually be, or their first choice, and actually be telling the truth. You know what I mean? Like most times it's always, yes, this was our first guy, but really in reality, they probably interviewed 3 or 4 other guys and then made their decision, or got told no by other guys and then finally got told yes. But for Billy Napier, that was their guy from the get-go. And, they didn't want to waste time and let him slip away to a place potentially like LSU that ended up getting Brian Kelly. So, I'm excited. I'm excited about that. And one thing that just popped in my head: how many people, even diehard college football fans, knew about Lincoln Riley before 2014 when he was the OC at East Carolina? Not very many people. I guarantee you that. And so, fast forward 7 years, and Lincoln Riley. USC is thought to be the, make the one that made the biggest splash hire this offseason. And, just 7 short years ago, nobody knew who he was. So I think this is kind of that level higher right now. I don't think people realize that right now, but I think in 6 or 7 years, you could possibly look back and say, wow, that was a splash hire back then, and we just kind of overlooked it. I think that that's kind of similar of what's happening here. And so you're kind of getting a guy like that right now at a discounted price, like we talked about. And obviously, if he does well, Florida's going to offer him, substantial money to stay and not jump ship. But and one other thing, the other thing that I've heard about Billy Napier that is just kind of it's welcoming to hear from a Florida fan standpoint is his loyalty to his programs is unlike any other. Like I said, he could have left Louisiana last year and pursued SEC jobs and chose to stay at Louisiana because he loved that program so much and loved what he was building there. So I think if you go to a place like Florida, I don't know if there's, other than maybe the NFL, I don't know if there's another job that a guy like Billy Napier with his, sense of loyalty, I don't know that he would leave on his own will. So, I think that was something else that stuck out about Billy Napier to Florida. And, who knows, crazier things have happened. I mean, obviously Brian Kelly was at Notre Dame for, I think, 12 or 13 years, and then just hits his guys with a text after they had seen it on social media already, but hits them with a text saying, "Yeah, I'm leaving," and then holds an 11-minute meeting with them. So I don't think that that's who Billy Napier is. Obviously, I'm not best friends with the guy, so I don't personally know. But from people close to him, they say that he is very loyal, but not loyal in the Dan Mullen sense, because Dan Mullen was uber loyal to his staffers, and that got him in, a little bit of trouble from a success standpoint at Florida. I think that had he made some cuts with his staff last year or even, the year before and got some better staff members in and coordinators, I think that might have saved his job a little bit, or at least prolonged it. But Billy Napier, they say that he's loyal, but he's also willing, and that's the thing that Dan Mullen wasn't, is willing to make the sacrifices necessary for your program to succeed. So I think that he separates the loyalty aspect of it and the necessity part, and puts that together and is just a complete coach and someone that Florida is quite frankly just in love with. So I think we saw that. So like I said, I'm excited about this hire, and I'll stop blabbing now, but we can move on if you want to.
Something else, you mentioned, Florida got their guy with the first chance. With Lincoln Riley, going to, USC, you mentioned earlier how USC, fired their coach months ago, and they're just now hiring Lincoln Riley. So who's to say, everybody's saying, Lincoln Riley, was this home run hire for USC. It might not have been the first option. Maybe they called Urban Meyer from Jacksonville, or who knows? Maybe some other people, had some calls as well. But obviously, Riley's with USC, and Brian Kelly is now with LSU, which is literally 4 days ago, you would have thought somebody was stupid if this would have happened. I mean, now we're looking at more top programs looking for head coaches, which is absolutely crazy. So what are your kind of, thoughts on Riley to USC and Kelly to LSU?
Oh, so my initial thought about Lincoln Riley to USC was, I was kind of, I think it caught everybody off guard, but I was kind of just asking myself, like, why? Like, he had an established program at Oklahoma, and I know USC has a very rich football tradition, but the program had really suffered for the past decade overall, with a couple successful seasons here and there, but overall had really suffered quite a bit. And from what I thought I understood about Lincoln Riley, I didn't think that he wanted a kind of a real rebuilding job. I didn't think he wanted to come in and fix anything. And so that kind of caught me off guard. But I guess when someone basically offers you the keys to the city of Los Angeles, I guess that's enough to entice you to go. So he's being paid very substantially out there. And, I think, kind of similar to Bill Napier in Florida, I think that Lincoln Riley had his list of things that he had to have for him to come. And I think that USC was, apparently they have the booster support to give him whatever he wanted. So, I mean, good for him for getting all that stuff. And good for USC. I think that USC being an elite program is great for college football. I don't necessarily agree with the way it happened with him going there, but as far as the fact of the matter is he's there. I think it's great for USC, great for college football, and I'm kind of excited to see what happens out there. I think people are kind of starving for some Pac-12 success for once. I mean, you've had some Oregon teams come out of there that didn't necessarily do a whole lot. You had the team that ended up playing Ohio State in the national championship and lost. But I think that the balance in college football is finally starting to spread a little bit. I don't think it's just the SEC. I don't think it's just, Ohio State. I don't think it's just Oklahoma. I think that from a geographical standpoint, having powerhouses all across the country, I think is a great thing for college football. I think even with Texas being down the past however long they've been down, 10 years, however long, I think with them being down, the recent success of Texas A&M kind of makes up for that from a geographical standpoint, being right there in Texas. So, you could have USC out there, you could have Oregon in the Northwest, Texas A&M, then obviously everybody in the SEC, Alabama, Georgia, those guys, Ohio State up north. If Michigan continues on the track that they are, that could be another powerhouse. So I think from a balance standpoint, I'm excited about where college football is headed. There for a few years, it just felt like there were four powers, and that was it. And I think that with more programs, becoming of higher quality, I think it's going to, I don't want to say water down, but I think it's going to spread the talent out a little more. I think USC being elite again will decrease, Alabama and Ohio State's California recruiting, because I felt like they were starting to really dip into that state and get some of the best talent out of there. So I think just keeping kids home is the main thing, and I think that that's great for college football.
And with this hire with USC, it makes so much more things interesting. Like one is like the Rose Bowl. Several years ago it was Oregon and Wisconsin. And honestly, both those teams weren't even that good, but you're having them in the Rose Bowl. Now we could see a top-tier program, USC, once again, taking on an Ohio State. And something else, you see these top hires, makes it so much better for the college football playoffs, because really up until the past year or so, it seems like every single season it's Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State, and the fourth one's a toss-up. We're not going to see Clemson. We're not going to see Ohio State. If Alabama loses against Georgia, we're not going to see them in the college football playoff, and it's crazy. And really, the past couple of years, it's starting to show that there's other teams starting to get better, and these teams who are in it every single year. It's so much better with the uncertainty, and you don't know who's going to be in it. It's so annoying when you see these teams. You already know before the season starts, those 4 teams, 3-4 teams are going to be in it. And it's Clemson, Alabama every single freaking year. But, finally get something different, which is good. But with Riley, to me, with USC, I feel like that was kind of mentioned, I already said, with, Riley with Florida. He has to win at least a couple of championships to make this contract worth it. The contract details are ridiculous. And, Brian Kelly to LSU, Coach O won a national championship a couple years ago with LSU, which honestly, that's really kind of debatable. That was really 100% all Burrow, but really
Jamar Chase.
Exactly. You look at Ogeron's record without Burrow that season. Take it away, it's not nearly as good. And they just won a championship a couple years ago. Oklahoma has been one of the best programs the past several years. You look at some of these coaching things. It's just crazy. Like Kelly to me with LSU, I just don't see how it's going to work out. Ogeron, he's like that, cool uncle you want to be around. But then you have Brian Kelly, who's like the the preacher of the group. Everybody like, let's calm down. Like they're two completely different guys. And then you have, Riley with USC. He's going to bring that, up-tempo offense like he had at Oklahoma. And it's just so interesting. I did not think we'd be having this conversation. Out of the two, I definitely feel like USC is going to benefit more opposed to LSU. And it's crazy. I saw something, I was either today or yesterday, looking at Ogeron's first 4 years at LSU. He had a better record at LSU his first 4 years than Jimbo Fisher has his first 4 years at A&M. And, nobody's really been calling for, Jimbo Fisher's head at A&M. It seems like, you're not really hearing about it much. And they really didn't get their first, really big win until last year when they beat Florida. So it's really crazy to me. Like some programs are, they win a championship 2 or 3 years ago and they're already finding a coach. And some of these other programs who are consistent, are content with being, consistently average or maybe mediocre. And it's crazy, really dumbfounding to me how it is, with some of these programs. And, looking at Oklahoma and Notre Dame, it's really interesting to see who their next coach is. Lots of people think it might be Urban Meyer, Fickell, or Freeman, Notre Dame's defense coordinator. I personally think, Freeman makes a lot of sense. The players seem to love him. I think, staying in-house might be the better option because if you get Urban Meyer, come get him out of the NFL, it's going to bring so much just attention. And, with Fickell, what he's done in Cincinnati, it will be a good hire. But, those guys are going to demand top dollar. I feel like Freeman, out of those choices, is kind of what I talked about earlier with Billy Napier. I feel like 3, it's the safest one. It's going to be the cheapest. And the expectations aren't going to be as high. The potential is really high, but it's a low reward, high, risk type of deal. Like Meyer, if you don't win a championship in 3-4 years, I mean that's horrible. If you're not in a playoff possible with Fickell, if you're not in the playoff controversy, it's not going to be worth it. So to me, I feel like Freeman with Notre Dame makes a lot of sense. I think it'll be stupid if they don't hire him. I think he's the clear choice. And Oklahoma, to me, I kept trying to think of somebody different, and the only person I could keep thinking of was Lane Kiffin. I said last week he's overrated. I think he is overrated, but just Lane Kiffin to me, I feel like it would make a lot of sense. The things he's been able to do at Ole Miss and FAU, have that high-powered offense, up tempo. We've already seen what he's done with Matt Corral. And you look at his defense, at Ole Miss and FAU. His defense is bland, average, maybe at best. And that's really what Oklahoma, their defense, that's why they haven't been going undefeated the past couple of years, because their defense is just so inconsistent. I feel like Kiffin, he with up-tempo, kind of like a Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, I think it makes a lot of sense. He's really the only person, in my opinion, that really fits the Oklahoma mold the past several seasons and kind of fitting Lincoln Riley's offense. And something else to me that hasn't really been talked about, at least in my opinion, the past couple of days, with Lincoln Riley going to USC, Brian Kelly going to LSU, Napier to Florida, Spencer Rattler, entered the transfer portal, which, was kind of expected. But if you were to tell me at the beginning of the season, Lincoln Riley's going to USC, Brian Kelly's going to LSU, and Spencer Rattler, the supposed to be Heisman frontrunner, going to be the first overall pick heading the season, is going to enter the transfer portal. All in the span of 2 days, I would have thought you were like high or something. Like this is just insane. Like who knows where Rattler is going to go now? Like maybe USC, but it's like everything like a week ago or really beginning of the season. Like nobody possibly could imagine all this madness in college football. And really, this is what makes college football so great. Like tons of storylines, different stuff like that. But with me, with Oklahoma, I feel like Kiffin, I think that would be it's a risky choice, but I think it would be good. And Notre Dame, to me, I feel like Freeman has to be the top choice for the Fighting Irish.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to give a prediction of each of those schools, for Oklahoma, that's one that I kind of go back and forth on. I actually didn't think about Kiffin, but that's a great point. He's kind of very similar to Lincoln Riley. Really, I know their personalities are different, but as far as being a offensive-minded coach, defense really wasn't Lincoln Riley's forte there. and it's not Lane Kiffin's. I think that Lane Kiffin could really continue doing the exact same thing that Lincoln Riley was doing. Really, I think that Lane would really need to enhance his staff and his recruiting staff and that type of thing, and kind of bring in some better recruits than what he's used to. But I think if he did that, he could definitely do it at the level that Lincoln Riley did. But I won't, since you kind of think him, I won't choose him. I really think that the past 48 hours have shown me what Oklahoma really means to Bob Stoops. And I kind of wouldn't be surprised to see him. I don't know if it's a long-term thing. It may be 1 year or 2 years. I don't know. But I could kind of see Bob Stoops stepping in, and as he is already as the interim coach for their bowl game, I could kind of see him coming back. I think that if he were to come back anywhere, it would be Oklahoma. I know that his name was thrown out there for Florida, and I mentioned this last week. That was smoke from the beginning. I never thought that Bob Stoops would be a Florida's coach. I thought he had it too good doing the TV gig. But if he were to come back, I think it would be Oklahoma. So that's what I'm going to say. I mean, outside of him, I think that you could possibly throw in Matt Campbell as the next guy. With him already being in the Big 12, I'm sure Oklahoma officials are pretty familiar with him. So I think that could definitely be a possibility. But I'll say Bob Stoops for now. But for the Notre Dame job, my first reaction was, holy crap, this is Urban Meyer's dream job, really. I mean, this is what you go back. I mean, I've seen quotes and heard quotes of him saying Notre Dame is his dream job. And he actually had the chance to go there back in 2005 when he actually chose to go to Florida. I'm kind of surprised he went to Florida. I don't know all the details about that time. Maybe it was stuff that he was wanting done that only Florida would do and Notre Dame wouldn't do. So I don't know the details of that, but he ended up choosing Florida over Notre Dame. But I know that he's always had an admiration for Notre Dame football, and I think he would possibly be interested in Notre Dame. I don't know if Notre Dame is interested in Urban Meyer at this point, with his off the field issues, But as for who I think will be coach, or who I think should be coach, I think it should be Marcus Freeman. I think that kind of makes the most sense. You mentioned it from a money standpoint. I think it's very similar to the Billy Napier hire as far as a young upcoming coach that isn't going to demand a lot of money to begin with. And I think that you can use the rest of that money to disperse elsewhere and really try to build up the program outside of just the head coach. And if it were to be someone else other than Marcus Freeman, the only other logical person that I can think of would be Luke Fickell. And I think I said this last week on the podcast, Luke Fickell is a Midwest guy. So I saw people talking about him. They would want him at Florida. And I think from a cultural standpoint, he would have been good at Florida, but he's a Midwest guy. He knows, the areas, and he knows these high school programs. He that's just where he belongs. So I could definitely see him ending up at a place like Notre Dame. I think that would be a great leap for him. And like many other Cincinnati coaches have done, they've gone from Cincinnati to Notre Dame. I think he could be the next one in line. But if he doesn't, I think it should be Marcus Freeman. And here's the thing: I also think that if Luke Fickell were to take the Notre Dame job, I think either Marcus Freeman could stay on as defense coordinator. I think Marcus Freeman could leave and go elsewhere as the defense coordinator, or wait for it, he could go to Cincinnati and be the head coach. You never know. I mean, there's so many scenarios between the Cincinnati and Notre Dame job that could happen. It all depends on who Notre Dame wants as their guy. But if it were up to me, I would pick Marcus Freeman.
And it's one of those situations where, Brian Kelly could, kind of screw Cincinnati again if Fickle ends up going to Notre Dame. And to me, I feel like if Fickle doesn't want to go to Notre Dame, I don't really see, many other options for him, places that he would want to go to make him want to stay in Cincinnati. Like if he declines Notre Dame job, I feel like, he's just going to be in Cincinnati probably for like the rest of his career, for at least several more seasons. It's crazy. He's built a powerhouse in Cincinnati, and I completely agree. If Notre Dame were to get Fickle, I feel like Freeman would be a fantastic choice for Cincinnati. But with Oklahoma, to me, that is interesting with Stoops. It's crazy that he's going to be the head coach in the bowl game.
Yeah.
The more you read about that, it was just Riley goes to USC. That's kind of crazy. Then you see, Stoops is going to be, the head coach of the bowl game. Then you see Lincoln Riley's contract. It's like each thing you see, it gets more crazier and crazier. But to me, I feel like Campbell would be a good choice.
Mm-hmm.
Kiffin, Stoops, any of those three, I think would be good. The one thing I will say about Kiffin, though, this is I think it was second season with Ole Miss. He's already, coaching in the SEC. Starting 2023, Oklahoma is going to be in the SEC West. So his competition that Kiffin's playing right now is not going to be different. It's going to be exactly the same that it is 2 years from now, starting 2023. So to me, I think like that has maybe a little bit to do with it. And, I was looking at something. Part of the reason why Riley left was he was ticked off about Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 to go to the SEC. So I feel like Stoops and Kiffin for Oklahoma would be the top choice. And obviously, to me, I feel like Freeman and Fickle for Notre Dame. I don't think I would put Meyer up there. I know Meyer will probably want it, but I feel like Freeman out of those three would be the top choice. And it's crazy because when you look at Oklahoma and you look at Notre Dame, Oklahoma, if they won Saturday against Oklahoma State, all of a sudden, maybe if they, win the Big 12 championship, we're talking about Oklahoma being in the playoffs, and now they have, are going to have a new coach. Notre Dame, they still might end up being in the college football playoffs, but they don't have Brian Kelly as their coach. And, the college football playoff rankings were released today, and it sucks because I've had a top four from the first playoff rankings, I think November 2nd. I had Georgia, Ohio State, Cincinnati, and Alabama, and I finally had to change it now because, with the shocking win with Michigan over Ohio State, my top six is Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, Alabama, Oklahoma State, and Ohio State. I know Ohio State has 2 losses. I'm not putting Notre Dame above Ohio State. I know they have more losses. I think Notre Dame is a little bit overrated. Kind of mentioned it earlier. This, loss to Michigan, it was just crazy to me. And it's really not that Ohio State played bad. It was just Michigan really played just that great. In all phases of the game, they played phenomenal. And, that was my top 6. The actual top 6 is Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, and Notre Dame. So what are your kind of thoughts on this, recently released college football playoff rankings?
Oh, well, right off the bat, I mean, I kind of don't disagree with really any of the top 6. I think you could make that argument, like you said, with Ohio State being number 6 over Notre Dame. I think they do have a more impressive resume, despite having 2 losses compared to Notre Dame's 1. But as far as the true playoff contenders, I think that it's pretty spot on. And I'm going to go ahead and just get right to the point. If Michigan, Alabama, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State all win their conference championship game, which means Georgia loses, I would not be comfortable if I'm a Cincinnati Bearcat fan, because in that scenario, all of a sudden you've got 1-loss Georgia, you have 1-loss SEC champion Alabama. I think those 2 would be locks. You've got 1-loss conference champion Michigan, another lock. And then it comes down to Cincinnati, undefeated Cincinnati, or 1-loss Big 12 champion Oklahoma State. And if that happens, I would not be shocked, nor necessarily would I disagree with it either, about Oklahoma State being being put ahead of Cincinnati. It's not necessarily the fairest, from a group of 5 standpoint. But if you have Cincinnati ranked 4th, Oklahoma State ranked 5th, and Oklahoma State beats number 9 Baylor and completes their back-to-back top 10 wins, the resume for Oklahoma State is pretty off the charts. I mean, it might even be the best resume out of the top 5 seeds. It would really shock me if they kept Oklahoma State out. Now, in that scenario, I have no dog in the fight. If Cincinnati gets in, great. If Oklahoma State gets in, that's great too. Now, I don't think Georgia is going to lose to Alabama, but this is all based on if they would. Oklahoma State could get in over Cincinnati, and that's something to watch out for. Now, if Georgia wins, I think, and the other teams that I mentioned win, Cincinnati and Oklahoma State just kind of slide right in, and no harm done. Or Alabama is out of the picture, so I think everybody's going to be rooting against Alabama this week or this weekend. So if Alabama would somehow beat Georgia, I think all hell would break loose, and this would be one of those years where maybe the committee wishes that they had 8 teams or whatever, some sort of expansion, because it's going to make their job a living hell, really.
Yeah, Alabama is a very easy team to root against, and it's crazy because we talked last week how it was kind of where maybe it was good that the college football playoffs is just 4 teams, and now depending how the conference championships go, maybe we're better off at 6 or 8 if Cincinnati gets left out. You mentioned that scenario. That's one reason, obviously, if you're a Cincinnati fan, you want Alabama to end up losing. Another one is because if Alabama loses, they're out, which possibly, depending how Oklahoma State goes against Baylor, that's not an easy game for Oklahoma State. If possibly Cincinnati can go up to number 3, and then instead of having a 1 Georgia against a 4 Cincinnati, you could possibly be seeing a number 2 Michigan against a 3 Cincinnati. Yeah. And you would have the whole state of Ohio, cheering for Michigan. But it's crazy because I was talking to Braden a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying, if Michigan played Cincinnati, I think Cincinnati could beat them. Now, after what happened Saturday, I would probably pick Michigan, because that was just an amazing performance against Ohio State. Because I feel like Cincinnati and Michigan would be a much better game than Cincinnati and Georgia. Because I feel like if Cincinnati ended up playing Georgia, it's going to suck, because you're going to hear those people say, well, when Cincinnati gets humiliated, oh, that's why there should never be a group of 5 in the playoffs. Right. Because Georgia's getting killed regardless. Yeah. So I feel like if Cincinnati and Michigan, it makes it much more intriguing, because you don't really know who's going to win. Up until that game that passed Saturday with Michigan, to me, it's really been kind of a toss-up between those 2 teams if they played head-to-head. So to me, I feel like that's another reason why you want Alabama to lose. And you already mentioned that with, if they end up winning, maybe we don't even see Cincinnati in the playoffs, which would be absolutely ridiculous. But it's crazy because, we're getting towards, conference championship games, and there are still so many possibilities. And it's one of those things I mentioned weeks ago on an episode. It's like Cincinnati has done everything that they absolutely needed to, and still, despite, winning games, beating Notre Dame on the road, Notre Dame's first home loss, number 20 games, Notre Dame's 6th in the country. And there's a chance that Cincinnati still might be able to get in with all the crazy madness we've seen in college football this season. The fact that they still might not get in, even though they've done everything right, there are still just so many things that still need to go their way just for them to even get in the playoffs. It's crazy. And it just goes to show, this college football season to me is probably one of just the craziest ones we've ever had, because we're not going to see a Clemson. We're not going to see Ohio State. If Alabama loses, we're not going to see Alabama. We could see the first ever Group of 5 team in the college football playoffs with all these coach, hirings and firings the past couple of days. It is complete madness in college football. And with conference championship games, who knows? We don't even see more upsets. Cincinnati's playing Houston. Houston is no slouch. They don't have one this season, and they're ranked in the top 25. They're one of the only few Group of Fives who are ranked right now. And we saw this past week, UTSA was undefeated, went on the road against North Texas. They lost by over 20 points. So it's crazy because you could have all the momentum in the world, and it's like, boom, all of a sudden, it's like you can get shocked by a team, and you just get outplayed, and you end up losing before you even know it. So, Cincinnati, obviously, they had to take care of business against Houston, but I feel like that might be a closer game than people expect. Obviously, if they win, I would say they're in. Hopefully, they should get in. But it's so much fun watching college football this time of year because there's just so many different possibilities and everything.
Yeah, man. I mean, with the college football playoff at stake, with all these conference championship matchups and stuff, that's exciting enough. And then you've got the craziest coaching carousel in probably history. I've never seen anything like this with the power moves that these programs are making right now, pulling some big names from other big time programs, and then those programs having to therefore take someone from somewhere else. It's just crazy. I've never seen anything like it, and this is part of the reason why I don't understand how anyone likes any other sport more than college football. I mean, college football is just great, man. I can't wait to watch these games this weekend. And one game, not to get too off topic, but one game that I'm super excited to watch is I'm actually going to tune in and watch the Louisiana Sun Belt Championship versus Appalachian State. Those are two opponents that our Marshall Thunder and Herd are going to end up facing one day in the Sun Belt, but also Billy Napier is coaching that game for Louisiana, so I'm excited to see him in action, and from a different perspective. I've watched Louisiana several times, and I actually earlier this season on my podcast, I had predicted them to upset Texas early on in the season, and it obviously didn't pan out like I had hoped, but that ended up being Louisiana's lone loss on the year. And then on the flip side of that, they're, like I said, they're playing Appalachian State. I've actually sat in the living room of Appalachian State's their head coach's parents' house, and I've talked football with Coach Sean Clark's dad, and we actually talked about the transfer portal, and I point blank asked him. I said, knowing that Appalachian State last season, and for the seasons prior to that, they had a quarterback that had been there several seasons, and they were pretty high on, but never really got them to that took them to that next level. And I said, how does your son view the transfer portal, and is he willing to look into that about getting some sort of grad transfer? And he said, yeah, that him and his son, the head coach at Appalachian State, had talked about that before. And lo and behold, literally like 2 weeks later after we had talked about that, they ended up getting Chase Bryce, the former Clemson, former Duke quarterback, to come to Appalachian State, and he's had a fantastic year. So that's just an interesting little tidbit for you there. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to Louisiana and Appalachian State, and obviously the Cincinnati and Houston matchup and the other Power 5 matchups, as those games have playoff implications.
Yeah, that's a really, really cool story. And, looking at, Appalachian State, just a couple of years ago, they had Elijah Drinkowitz, who's now the head coach of the state. So, Appalachian State's head coach, I mean, they're always really good. So maybe it's just a matter of time until he gets a Power 5 opportunity as well. That game is definitely an intriguing matchup. So, obviously Cincinnati, Houston, everybody's talking about, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia and Alabama, and all these games that certainly, have so much hype around them. But, with Louisiana, Appalachian State, that's an underrated matchup. I think one of the more underrated matchups. Something else is Western Kentucky and UTSA. That one to me on Friday nights, UTSA was undefeated up until this past week. Western Kentucky's, they've not lost since they played UTSA earlier in the season. I mean, scoring 47 points in the second half against Marshall. I mean, that's going to be a great game. There's so many great games, Michigan and Iowa. Iowa, I think they're overrated, but, Michigan's been, known for, having games they, should win and end up losing. If they lose, I mean, the madness just gets crazier and crazier. Cannot wait for those conference championship games. So, is any kind of final thoughts or anything like that as we kind of close it out?
Yeah, when you mentioned the Michigan Iowa game, I think that Iowa is definitely, they proved that they aren't who we maybe thought they were early in the season. So that's no secret, but they're no slouch at the same time. They have a pretty good defense that if you turn the ball over, they can make the game interesting. And Michigan's, they're really in a spot where they're coming off the biggest win in the past 10 years of their program, literally. And, you just don't really know how they're going to respond after a win like that and what their mental state is going to be coming into this game where so much is on the line. This very well could be a game where they come out and just absolutely crumble. It could be a game where they, maybe have a first half collapse and then get it together and pull one out and, kind of sneak into I don't want to say sneak, but, will get into the playoff, or they may come out with the same mentality that they did last week, which, by the way, is a mentality that I haven't seen from a Michigan squad in a long, long time. For the first time in a while, I felt like Michigan was the more physical team than Ohio State. I felt like they were the more prepared team, and they executed. Something not necessarily that Ohio State didn't execute, but they didn't execute at a high enough level. I think Michigan was just kind of really clicking on all cylinders last week against Ohio State. So, I'm anxious to see what Michigan team shows up because, we've seen them collapse this year, obviously against Michigan State. We've seen them struggle in some games where they've snuck them out. So I'm anxious to see this game. I don't necessarily know that Michigan's just going to come out and blow them out. I kind of don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think that they're going to come out and win the game, but are they going to dominate it in the same fashion like they did against Ohio State? I mean, I think that just kind of remains to be seen. But you and I will definitely be tuning in, and maybe I don't know, next week or week after or something like that. If you wanted to get together and do this, we could review those games and kind of do like a bowl preview and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely down for a bowl preview. Bowl seasons is one of the best times of the year. And, with Michigan, and it's like, with Iowa, even last week when they played Ohio State and they really had control of the whole game, Harbaugh outcoached Ryan Day, which has never happened before, even though they were up. To me, it was one of those situations where you really didn't know it was over until it was over type of deal because, since they blew that lead to Michigan State, you don't know if they're capable of doing it again because we've seen it in the past. But the fact that they were able to maintain that lead and play better in the second half than they did in the first half. In the first half, they played great, but the second half, it just took them to a whole another level. It will be interesting to see how they play this week against Iowa. Cannot wait for the conference championship games. So many still different possibilities for the college football playoffs. So, TJ, can you kind of tell some of the listeners to follow you on social media?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter at tshoemaker2423, or you could follow my podcast page, which is at Section 111 Pod. If you guys want to get on there and check out some of my podcast episodes, feel free to do so. You can find them on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just check it out, see if it's for you, and if you like it, continue to tune in. Usually I try to do an episode every week. Sometimes it doesn't always work out like that. If my schedule and the guest schedule doesn't pan out, sometimes, I just do it every other week. But you can find the episodes on there and, check it out. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, I definitely put the links in the description below so they can, check out your podcast and everything like that. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to go follow me on Instagram, the Sports Dude Hine Show, and S Dude Hine Show on Twitter. Once again, thank you all so much for listening. I'll see you all next time on the Sports Dude Hine Show.